Let's see what's wrong with our economy now. In a nutshell, here it is. Prices have gone up, wages have not. Businesses, both big and small, cannot find people to actually staff open positions. We have over twice as many job openings as we do people looking for work. This is the problem in the economy. How do we fix it? First is fix inflation. Drill, frack, burn coal, embrace nuclear energy. That's how we drive inflation down. That's how we drive GDP growth. No longer pay people to stay at home rather than to go to work. Attach work requirements to welfare. That's how we bring down the national debt. It's also how we help address the open positions in the economy. And I also think that we need radical reform of the U.S. Federal Reserve. What does that mean? Restore dollar stability. Peg the dollar to gold, silver, nickel, and agricultural and farm commodities to stabilize the dollar. That's how we'll see actually real wage growth rise in this country. With that, we're back to 5+% GDP growth. You know what? We're going to have a more united country when we're all making more money in that country. That much I'll be able to deliver by, I think, the end of my first 18 months in office.
You believe it?
Well, when I see it.
Yeah. You'll see it by 2026. That's the answer.
Leon,
thank you.
I want to figure out where your question's coming from. What have you been experiencing in Illinois, granted a democratically run state with a huge debt problem of its own, in the economy that makes this so important to you?
Well, I most definitely feel that myself and everyone around me is experiencing, as you mentioned, inflation. So across the board, whether it be the price of food, utilities, real estate. So it's a real problem for everyone. So.
And it's great you bring that up because there's this narrative now that inflation rates are coming down. Don't be fooled, and I suspect you won't be because you experience the prices when you go to the grocery store, when you're actually trying to change your lifestyle to match your actual budget, because inflation is cumulative. So here's the hard truth. Prices today are still 16% higher than when Biden first took office, yet wage growth is far more stagnant. So when wages stay flat and prices go up, people suffer as a consequence. That's where we are today. And I think that the unemployment number being low is also a false mirage because the real problem is the reverse. Businesses, both small and large, cannot find enough workers to actually drive their growth. These are structural failures in the economy. And so we have to actually understand what's going on. Believe me, that's not going to take a professional politician to get that job done. Maybe somebody who has actually built multi-billion-dollar companies in the private sector, who has executive experience, that's exactly what it's going to take to see this through.
You said there's a hard truth. The other hard truth is that we have an exploding national debt.
Yes, we do.
And we are at a point where it pretty clearly within the next couple of years, there's a possibility, if interest rates stay where they are, that the interest on the national debt is going to be more than the tax receipts of the U.S. government. The only way to fix that is entitlement reform. Medicare, Social Security, possibly Medicaid reform. Are you up for that?
I am up for that after we have delivered economic growth. We're starting from a place of deep distrust right now, and for good reason. So the first step we need to take is actually deliver GDP growth. I can get us back to 5+% GDP growth compared to 1-point-something% now. After that, people have more money in their pockets. Then we can have the conversation about how for the next generation, not touching the benefits of seniors now, but for the next generation, how we rationalize by first taking aim at the bureaucracy. Those are the easiest savings we can derive, plus work requirements for welfare. That gives us a big head start.
All right. You have made an incredible career for yourself by being an excellent, among other things, salesman. And with confidence in yourself and confidence in your ability to get things done. I want to read for you a quote from the New York Times. Obviously, it's the New York Times, but you'll know where we're going. Mr. Ramaswamy's enterprise, meaning your first business, is best known for a spectacular failure. As a 29-year-old with a bold idea and Ivy League connections, he engineered what was at the time the largest initial public offering in the biotechnology industry's history, only to see the Alzheimer drug at the center fail 2 years later and the company's value tank. But Mr. Ramaswamy, now 37, made a fortune anyway.
Yeah, I can address that.
I know you can, but let me just ... You sold investors on the Alzheimer's drug, and you're selling people here that you can achieve 5% GDP growth. What did you learn from past failures that make your current promises more believable?
Well, it's a great question. And believe me, I think that failure is part of what makes every entrepreneur stronger. 99.7% of drugs ever tested for Alzheimer's disease have failed by big pharma and small. My drug for Alzheimer's was not an exception on that. However, here's how I did achieve my success. That built the foundation for developing 5 FDA-approved medicines, one in life-saving therapy in kids, another for prostate cancer, for endometriosis, uterine fibroids, psoriasis, and all in my 7 years as a biotech CEO. So what did I learn from that? Hardship is not a choice. Hardship is something that happens to you. Victimhood is a choice. And we choose not to be victims. We choose to be victorious. I think that is a lesson for America where we find ourselves now. We are a nation in hardship, but we should not choose to cower in that hardship. That can make us stronger. My company would have never been as strong as it was had we not gone through the experience of developing that drug for Alzheimer's disease. And it was many of those same people that helped deliver life-saving medicines and life-changing medicines for other diseases. That is actually what this American story is all about. And you know what? Capitalism, it is the best system known to man to lift people up from poverty. My father was facing layoffs under Jack Welch's tenure at GE, had to go to law school at night to help us make the ends meet at home. Here I am, a single generation later, building multi-billion-dollar companies by developing life-saving medicines, and by the way, building a separate successful asset management firm. That's the American dream that I want to show every kid in this country is possible. That's also, by the way, how we'll get back to 5+% GDP growth.
Your dad going to night school for law school had a big impression on you, didn't it?
It did, actually. It showed me that, you know what? You don't complain about the hardships that you face. You find ways to deal with it. My mom, on certain nights, would take my brother and I to go play the piano in the nursing homes where she was treating patients with Alzheimer's disease. She was a geriatric psychiatrist. That had an influence on me. In fact, if there's something I do when I leave the presidency in 2033, I'll be 48 years old, something like this. Well, you know what? One of the things I still want to come back to doing, if nobody else has figured out in the meantime, is see if we can't deliver a treatment, dare I say, a cure for Alzheimer's disease. That is what we do as Americans. We are the pioneers. We are the explorers. Nobody stops us from realizing our maximal potential, the greatest positive impact we can have. For me, it's just that the next step, that has to be through reviving the national soul.
All right.
That comes through the presidency.
Speaking of hardship, few people in America, I mean, obviously we were dealing with what's going on in Hawaii right now with the wildfires, 100 dead, possibly more. It's getting an enormous amount of national media attention. Something that did not necessarily get a lot of national media attention, aside from here on NewsNation, is the disaster in East Palestine, Ohio, your home state. Hillary Flint lives near the disaster site where the train derailed and spilled millions of gallons of toxic chemicals and is with us in studio tonight.
Thank you. So over 6 months ago, a train derailed less than 5 miles from my house in Eden Valley, Pennsylvania. I then self-evacuated about 20 miles into Beaver County, and that same evening, the Shell Plastics plant flared and exposed me, a cancer survivor, to even more carcinogens. Now those same companies that have poisoned myself, my community, my home, are in charge of taking care of us. They're in charge of the health and safety of thousands of people within Pennsylvania and Ohio. So my question for you is, as a multimillionaire, how are you going to protect everyday Americans like me from billion-dollar companies?
Well, look, I think that I'm aiming to do it as your next president, but it's interesting you did bring up my financial success. When that happened in East Palestine, I didn't know what to do. I wish people say, do you want to go there and visit? What am I going to do by showing up? That's not going to change anything. Actually, I don't think I've talked about this publicly before, but my family made a $100,000 donation to the recovery efforts just because that was the least we could do for our own home state. And yet we still felt like we were struggling against the backdrop of a failing infrastructure. We have a failed Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, who will wax eloquent about climate change without even taking the time to visit or even acknowledge the actual catastrophe until it cost him political points. The reality is, even now in Maui, our fellow Hawaiians, our fellow citizens, are left to fend for themselves as the U.S. government sends $200 billion to protect somebody else's border from an invasion when we have problems right here at home. We're doing more for Ukrainian infrastructure than we are for U.S. infrastructure in this country. So a big part of what I've said is we're going to put the interests of Americans first. We're not going to build infrastructure in Ukraine. We're not going to pay the deep state in Ukraine. Our own taxpayer dollars are going to pay them. Let's actually rebuild the infrastructure in this country with those same dollars, not with tax increases, but with better uses of the dollars that we're using to nation build somewhere else. We talk a lot about nation building. We have a nation to rebuild right here back at home. That's what I stand for. And by the way, as it relates to those railroad companies and otherwise, end the crony capitalism and corruption. Many of them are waxing eloquent about ESG and climate change. How about just taking care of the communities that you're actually running through? And when you've taken care of Central Ohio and Western Pennsylvania, then talk to me about what you're doing for global climate change in the Eastern Hemisphere. Until then, take care of your job here at home to the communities that you're affecting.
All right. I'm going to follow up on that for you. There's a few things there. We'll get to Ukraine in a second. But just quickly, you're proposing to gut a number of the three-letter agencies whose job it is to protect East Palestine.
You know what I'm proposing? I'm proposing to gut them precisely because they haven't been protecting places like East Palestine.
Fair enough.
These bureaucracies have failed repeatedly. And you know what? If somebody broke your car, you don't turn over the keys to the guy who broke it.
Well, then who's going to do it?
Well, I think actually I would just take that money. Here's a general blueprint for how I'll run the federal government, from healthcare to education policy, even to other areas of the federal government. Take those savings and put that money back in the pockets of our citizens. Just send them a tax-free check if that's what it takes. Everyone in this country will be strictly better off than to feed the beast of our Leviathan and bureaucracy in the meantime. That's exactly how we drive change.
All right. We're an hour in. You've gotten to a word that I don't know. The Leviathan?
Yes, the Leviathan is Thomas Hobbes' word 400 years ago for the monster, the beast. The Leviathan today is those three-letter monstrous agencies that really quash the will of everyday citizens, all right? This is what Thomas Hobbes envisioned 400 years ago. That's what gave inspiration to our founding fathers to write a constitution that says, you know what? We, the people, create a government that is accountable to us, not the other way around. That is the American way. And you know what, Leland? Some people call me extreme at times. Guilty as charged. Because the American ideals that founded this country, they are extreme ideals. For most of human history, it was done the other way.
The most radical idea that's ever been tried.
Exactly. So let's embrace that radicalism and shut down those government agencies.
One part of America that has also been radical is our willingness to help our allies abroad. World War I, World War II, we were attacked, but then we went to war as well.
We went to war when Pearl Harbor was bombed.
Right.
And yes, if you mess with us on our homeland, we will come for you and you will have hell to pay for it.
World War I, we also got it. We also went into NATO, okay, and agreed to protect our allies. It's something that America has done that's unique to America, to spread and expand our own territory, but to expand freedom. You've drawn a direct parallel between aid to East Palestine, aid to Ukraine, and what we're doing in Ukraine. That is unique pretty much not only in the Republican field, but in the presidential field as well. Is your comments not simply emboldening someone who has a large nuclear arsenal and has publicly stated his goals are to take over more land and potentially attack U.S. allies?
The answer to that question is no. Here's how I actually define peace in Ukraine. We will do a deal. In a good deal, everybody has to get something out of the deal. I'll start with what Putin gets out of the deal. We will freeze the current lines of control, just like we did at the end of the Korean War. We will further make a commitment that NATO will not admit Ukraine to NATO. Remember, James Baker told Gorbachev in 1990 that we would not have NATO expand 1 inch beyond Germany. Well, look what we've done since then. In return, though, I will require that Vladimir Putin exit his military partnership with China. The Russia-China military partnership outmatches the United States on nuclear capabilities, on hypersonic missiles, on China's naval capacities, all the while a country in China that we depend on for our modern way of life. And worst of all, through the Ukraine war, we're actually pushing Russia further into China's hands. So I will end that war on terms that advance American interests. This is also how
You just said you'd make a deal with Vladimir Putin.
Yes, I would.
Has Vladimir Putin ever made a deal that he's lived up to?
because we haven't actually backstopped it with the proper self-interest. I don't trust Vladimir Putin, but I trust him to follow his self-interest. And if we've reopened economic relations with Russia, if we have actually made a hard commitment that NATO will not admit Ukraine to NATO, he will have no reason to be in that military partnership with China. He doesn't enjoy being Xi Jinping's little brother. He wants to actually have a trilateral world order, not a bilateral one that favors China where he's the little stepson. So the reality is, I can trust him to follow his self-interest, by the way, just like Nixon did for Mao Zedong in 1972.
All right.
I'm speaking at the Nixon Library later this week, laying out this is a reverse Nixon maneuver. We didn't trust Mao, but we trusted him to follow his self-interest. We shouldn't trust Putin, but we can trust him to follow his self-interest, and he can trust us to follow ours. And that's why I think I will be more effective in leading this country if I'm honest with the rest of the world, as I will be with all of you, that I stand unapologetically for America's interests. You know what? That may sound bad to some people on the global stage, but they know they can believe it. They know it's honest. That's exactly how you can make deals if you're doing it based on honest terms.
You have certainly shown an ability to speak your mind during the campaign and be clear and be bold. Some of your other bold suggestions are about the border. Corey Howard has been impacted by the southern border crisis that is 1,200 miles away from where we are here in Chicago. I would say probably a couple of years ago, Corey, you never thought you'd be talking about the border as something coming here to you.
No, I didn't, sir. Good evening, Vivek Ramaswamy. I live in the Woodlawn neighborhood in Chicago, where an elementary school closed by the city years ago is now being used to house migrants. The community has experienced migrants' assaults, vandalism of personal property, and the police seem unwilling to deal with this concern. You have commented to use the U.S. military on the border to curb this. How will you respond if Congress is opposed to this course of action?
Which high school or which school?
Wadsworth Elementary.
Wadsworth, okay. So I visited South Shore High School, also here in Chicago. The same thing's happening over there. By the way, I went to the south side of Chicago, just a couple of months ago. Not a very popular stop on the Republican campaign trail, I'll say, but I'm glad I went there because people in that community are asking the same question that I'd be asking in their shoes, and I am asking now. Why are illegal migrants who break the law to come here being housed at a high school at the cost of $7,000 per migrant per month when we're not doing very much for that community right here at home? So yes, I believe the wall has been insufficient. I do think we need to finish building the wall, but it's not enough. They're building cartel-financed tunnels underneath that wall, bringing fentanyl, illegal migrants, criminals into this country daily by the thousands. So yes, I've said that I will use the military to protect not an invasion across somebody else's border halfway around the world, but to protect against the invasion, increasingly even the armed invasion, cartel gunmen included, across our own southern border. All right, I believe I will do this as the commander-in-chief without asking Congress either for permission or for forgiveness, because I'm the commander-in-chief and I will station our troops not in places by the tens of thousands like we have in Germany today or in other parts of the world where they're not really doing much of great use. And the young men and women in our military, they will and should be proud of protecting our nation right here at home. That's my modern foreign policy, a modern Monroe Doctrine, which says that you do not mess with the United States of America on our own home turf or in the Western Hemisphere. And if you do, and China is doing it, it's Chinese-made fentanyl through the synthetic materials that the drug cartels are using to make fentanyl that they're pumping across our southern border. No, you don't mess with us here. We will defend. And I think our national defense has been skewed for the last 20 years, going and playing offense, fighting somebody else's war. Under my watch, our national defense spending will once again go towards defense of the homeland, protecting our citizens right here at home.
Corey, I see you smiling. You think a Republican has a chance on the south side of Chicago?
I think a lot of constituents in Chicago would welcome a different course of action, sir.
Yeah. You got a haircut down there, didn't you?
I did get a haircut down there. I kind of need one again. Maybe I should go down there if I was here a little longer. It was a good haircut they gave me.
All right, Corey, thank you very much. Still ahead, Mr. Ramaswamy weighs in on the Trump indictments, the breaking news from earlier, and the Hunter Biden investigation. We'll see you in a minute.